You're watching the Everything Network.
The Bacon brothers, Jonathan, Jared, and Jamie Bacon, are a trio of gangsters from Abbotsford, British Columbia, who are suspected of multiple firearms and drug trafficking charges and implicated in a rash of homicides that took place in the Fraser Valley and Greater Vancouver area. The Bacon family originated from Edmonton. David Bacon was a special needs teacher who moved to Abbotsford after being hired by the Abbotsford School District, while his wife Susan worked as a property manager for the Prospera Credit Union. The Bacon family was comfortably middle class. The three Bacon brothers were Jonathan David, born January 31st, 1981, Jared Wayne, born March 14th, 1983, and James Kyle Jamie, born August 1st, 1985. Jonathan Bacon attended W.J. Mouat Secondary School and excelled at wrestling. One woman who knew the Bacon brothers, who has asked to be identified only as Stephanie, suspected that Jonathan was working as a drug dealer, saying, "When you see a kid start to have money all of a sudden, you immediately figure it's drugs." Stephanie described Jonathan as a popular student who loved wrestling and who became colder as he became to associate with a group of older men, saying of his new friends, "They were older, some of them in their 20s. They all had cars and expensive stuff like jewelry and watches. When Jonathan started to hang out with them, he started acting like them, talking like them, dressing like them." Another woman who went to school with Jonathan, who asked to be identified only as Amy, stated that the Bacon family was considered to be mostly normal, but the two younger Bacon brothers were viewed as bad news. Amy described Jonathan as becoming more distant as he aged, saying, "It's not like he became mean and nasty or like a bully or anything. It's just that he became less friendly, more of a tough guy." Amy also stated that Jonathan's new friends, including the non-Asians, all had tattoos in Chinese writing. Members of the United Nations gang are required to have the phrase honor, loyalty, respect in Chinese characters tattooed on themselves. Jonathan graduated from Mouat in 1999 and did not go to college. In 2000, he was arrested and convicted of drug possession, and again in 2001 for the possession of stolen goods. In 2001, David and Susan Bacon purchased an expensive house on Strathcona Court with 7 bedrooms that sparked much discussion in the community about how a teacher and a property manager could afford their new home. Jared and Jamie both attended Yale Secondary School. Jared took up wrestling in 2002 and in 2003 won the Provincial High School Wrestling Championship. Jamie followed his brothers in embracing wrestling, and in his final year of high school won a provincial gold medal in wrestling. One woman who knew Jared, who was asked to be identified only as Andrea, stated, "He was a tough guy, pushing his weight around. While Jonathan could be quite charming at times, Jared was more like a thug. My little brother and all his friends would avoid him at all costs." Andrea said of Jamie, "He was a jerk. I never liked him. At his age, lots of guys can be immature, but Jamie was like mean, like over the top, like he seemed to enjoy pissing other people off." Another woman known as Christine stated about Jared, "I couldn't believe it when I heard he was a teacher's son. He was disruptive in class and seemed not to care at all about his work." Christine said of Jamie, "He always had new fancy things, like clothes and jewelry, and he had a car when he was very young. A big car, an expensive one. I just assumed it was drugs." On May 15, 2001, Jamie was arrested for assault at the age of 15, an incident that is little known owing to a court ban. Journalist Jerry Langton wrote that the Bacon brothers were typical of the gangsters in the Lower Mainland, who usually came from middle-class families with loving parents. Langton wrote that Bacon brothers didn't come from poverty or in abusive or broken homes. In fact, they came from exactly the opposite upbringing that many social critics say incubates crime. The Bacon brothers lived in middle-class affluence in a nice house with their supportive parents. They went to good schools at which they excelled athletically and were popular socially. They were just some guys who thought they could get rich selling drugs. A man who asked only to be identified as Nelson, who moved from Toronto to Abbotsford, lived on Strathcona Court and knew the Bacon family. Nelson described the Bacon brothers as being in their 20s, but still living with their parents. Nelson said that the brothers made everyone in the neighborhood nervous, and that nobody wanted to run into them because they were obnoxious and rude. It started with the old man. He was not just rude, but aggressively so. I have no idea how he had a job as a teacher. Nelson called Jonathan the most relatively reasonable of the three Bacon brothers, while Jared tried to look like a gangster in dark suits and expensive sunglasses. He looked like he had more money than taste. Nelson called Jamie the worst of the three brothers, saying he was the size of a moose and seemed about half as smart. While the other two had macho swagger, Jamie looked like a psycho. Nelson stated that the Bacon brothers dominated the neighborhood doing whatever they pleased, like parking their expensive luxury cars, holding up traffic, and having loud parties well into the night. When Langton asked Nelson about the origins of their Bacon brothers' wealth, he stated, "They sold drugs, of course." The Royal Canadian Mounted Police believed the Bacon brothers were working with the United Nations gang, rather than for them. The brothers held in contempt Clayton Ruesch and what Langton called his juvenile faux Asian semi-religious rituals. In 2004, Jared was charged with attempted murder after a man was shot at the Fraser Valley Inn. The charges were dropped when the victim of the shooting refused to testify against him in court. In 2005, Jonathan moved out of his parents' house and rented a house on Winfield Drive with his girlfriend, Raylene Burton. Their neighbors described their residence as expensive-looking, automobiles constantly being parked in his driveway and on the street, as various tough-looking guys were always coming and going into the house. The police arrested and charged Jonathan with leading a break-in into a marijuana grow-op, but the unwillingness of the witnesses to testify against him led to Jonathan only being convicted of possession of stolen goods. Jonathan also started taking helicopter lessons from Dustin Princess Haugen, a helicopter pilot known to work as a drug smuggler for the United Nations gangs, flying drugs over the American border. In March 2005, Haugen was involved in a helicopter crash that killed his girlfriend, Christian Alexander. Haugen claimed that he was taking Alexander on a sightseeing trip at night. John ceased his helicopter lessons after the crash. The Abbotsford police put Jonathan Bacon under surveillance, and on the afternoon of August 4, 2005, Constable John Forster was informed by the surveillance team that he was sitting in the car of Godwin Cheng, a known drug dealer, in front of his house. Forster ordered the policemen present to arrest both men, and after arresting the two, the police found 8 ounces of marijuana, 15 ecstasy pills, 92 hits of methamphetamine, and $2,600 in cash in Cheng's car. Upon seeing Bacon's arrest, Burton fled from the house in her SUV, and after she was arrested only blocks away from Bacon's house, the police found $88,000 in cash inside her SUV. After being granted a search warrant, the Abbotsford police found in Bacon's house 4 handguns, 2 automatic and the other 2 semi-automatic. They also found a police scanner and a genuine police constable's uniform. It turns out Jonathan was dressing up as a policeman, apparently to assist with robbing other drug dealers. On October 25, 2005, Jamie Bacon, together with Dennis Karbovanek of the Red Scorpions, were arrested for uttering death threats and pointing weapons after becoming involved in a verbal altercation on Sandy Hill Road. On September 21, 2006, A drive-by shooting at Strathcona Court left Jonathan Bacon wounded in the driveway as he took multiple gunshots. As Jonathan recovered from the shooting, many of his duties fell upon Jamie, whom Langton called the monstrous, childish monosyllabic bodybuilder and wrestler. On December 7, 2006, at the Castle Fun Park in Abbotsford, Jamie was attending a meeting when a passerby happened to notice that one of the men attending the meeting was carrying a gun and called the police. Arrested alongside Jamie were Randy Naker and Barry Espadilla of the Independent Soldiers and Dennis Karbovanek and Anton Huites Mersing of the Red Scorpions. In 2006, the Bacon brothers partnered with the Red Scorpions to help them compete with the United Nations gang. The authorities believe that the brothers took leadership control of the Red Scorpions shortly thereafter. It is believed that the Bacon brothers' takeover of the Red Scorpions was orchestrated by the Hells Angels to reduce the Red Scorpions down to a Hells Angels puppet gang. Clayton Ruesch, the boss of the United Nations gang, was dismissive of the Bacon brothers, saying, "To me, they were just little errand boys." Unlike Abbotsford, which has its own police force, Surrey hired out its policing to the RCMP. The Mountie detachment for Surrey was much smaller than the Abbotsford police force, and most of its members are not from British Columbia. There was perception in the Lower Mainland underworld in the early 21st century that Surrey was an easier place to operate in, as the RCMP detachment for Surrey is more transit, as most of its members rotate around various posts in Canada and hence lack local roots. On April 13, 2007, as Jamie Bacon was in the process of parking his car in the driveway of his house, his Corvette automobile was shot up by two gunmen who put bullets into the vehicle. Jamie jumped out of the car, pulled out a Glock handgun, and fired 4 shots at the would-be assassins who were now running away. Jamie was slightly wounded from the attack as he was wearing a bulletproof vest. As he was being driven to the hospital to treat the slight gash on his head, Jamie told Constable Byron Donovan of the RCMP, who was riding with him, that the shooting was part of the lifestyle. Jamie told Constable Donovan that he always wore a bulletproof vest whenever he went out as part of his lifestyle. Jamie also stated he was wearing a level 3 bulletproof vest, which he stated were the best quality bulletproof vests, which he had learned. The Lower Mainland was gripped by a gang war in 2007 to 2009, as the Red Scorpions fought the United Nations gang, while the Hells Angels and their puppet gang, the Independent Soldiers, sought to play off both sides, supplying guns to both the rival gangs, which greatly increased the violence. Allied with the United Nations gang against the Red Scorpions was the Doc Dura gang. The gang war increased the dependence of both the Red Scorpions and the United Nations gang on the Hells Angels, cementing their control of the Lower Mainland underworld. The police response to the gang war was greatly hindered by the perception that the police forces in the Lower Mainland were grossly inept, which people unwilling to come forward with information, which was the legacy of the Picton case. Picton was finally arrested in 2002, but the way that the police had ignored the evidence that Picton was a serial killer gave police forces in the Lower Mainland a reputation for being extremely incompetent and callous, which made ordinary people unwilling to risk their lives to come forward with information during the gang war. Throughout the gang war, the police forces in the Lower Mainland consistently appealed to the public for more information about the gangsters, as it was openly admitted that the police were operating in an information vacuum. In 2007, Edward Eddie Narong, one of the founding members of the Red Scorpions, broke away to found his own gang along with Corey Jason Lal. Corey Lal refused a demand from Jamie Bacon to pay him a $100,000 tax for the right to sell drugs in Surrey. Justice Kathleen Kerr stated in 2020 that Bacon wanted Lal killed because of his ego, saying he didn't want to look weak. In their world, Corey Lal had to die. Kerr stated that Jamie was the leader of a diabolical plot to have Lal killed. Jamie Bacon met with Corey at a McDonald's restaurant to threaten his life, warning he would be killed if he did not pay the tax he wanted. On October 19, 2007, the Surrey 6 massacre made the gang war in Vancouver front-page news. On that day, 6 people were shot dead inside Unit 1505 at the Balmoral Tower in Surrey. The dead included 4 gangsters, namely Edward Eddie Narong, age 22, Michael Justin Lal, age 26, his brother Corey Jason Lal, age 22, and Ryan Bartolomeo, age 19. The Lal brothers had been in a dispute about how much taxes they owed the Red Scorpions for the right to sell drugs in Surrey, and had broken away to found their own gang. The newly founded Lal gang had been exterminated in its entirety with the Surrey 6 massacre. 2 innocent bystanders, Chris Mohan, who lived across from Unit 1505, and a gas installation man, Edward Schellenberg, were also killed as inconvenient witnesses to the massacre. Jamie Bacon was not present at the massacre, but Justice Kerr stated he was the chief architect of the massacre. Kerr stated that Bacon was driven by his ego to order the slayings, saying, "In the twisted logic and perverse code of the criminal point of view, there is a zero-tolerance policy for displays of disrespect and defiance. Such conduct must be quickly deterred. Death is often the punishment meted out for such behavior." Staff Sergeant Derek Brassington of the Surrey RCMP was assigned to lead the investigation into the Surrey 6 massacre. Brassington was a career Mountie, married to a fellow Mountie who was known as a cop's cop. Brassington was assigned to the Surrey 6 case as reportedly the best detective in British Columbia. Evidence released after the convictions of the police detectives in charge of the Surrey 6 case in 2019 showed that instead of pursuing the killers behind the Surrey 6 massacre, the Mountie detectives in charge of the case spent a disproportionate amount of their time in drunken debauchery. The elite police team spent much of their time being intoxicated at various bars and strip clubs while making sexual advances on female witnesses, which nearly ruined the case against Jamie Bacon. 2 of the officers convicted claimed that their job stress made them incapable of rational thinking, and the riotous bacchanalian excess that the squad engaged in was a result of their stress-induced mindlessness. Brassington's superior, Inspector David Attu of the RCMP, tried very hard to seduce the girlfriend of one of the witnesses for the Crown, which nearly caused the man to break off his agreement to testify against Jamie Bacon. The detectives in charge of the Surrey 6 case all faced charges of fraud for billing the Crown for overtime pay, while they instead drinking in various bars and strip clubs. Langton wrote about the Surrey 6 massacre. "The killers had more chutzpah and ego than they had any technical knowledge of how best to go about assassination. They left behind a huge mess of DNA and other evidence. But real investigations are not at all like the magic they show on TV and in movies. To build a compelling case from even the sloppiest murder scene takes lots of hours of hard work and no small amount of luck." The Fiji-born Eileen Mohan, the mother of Chris Mohan, became an eloquent spokeswoman for the cause of law and order, demanding that the police take action to bring the killers of her son to justice. By this point, the Bacon brothers had become major celebrities in the Lower Mainland, as the brothers courted attention by wearing expensive clothing, driving expensive cars, and always having their attractive girlfriends in tow. In the same way that Maurice Boucher became a folk hero in Montreal during the Quebec Biker War, the Bacon brothers became folk heroes in the Lower Mainland, being mobbed by adoring fans in their public outings. The Bacon brothers were widely idolized and admired throughout the Lower Mainland for their apparent ability to outwit both rival gangster and the Crown. Many young men in the Lower Mainland started to copy the short, cropped hairstyle favored by the Bacon brothers, who were seen as the zenith of cool. The American journalist Jesse Hyde wrote the media in the Lower Mainland loved the Bacon brothers, always obsessively following their latest move. Starting in February 2008, Eileen Mohan spoke at various rallies in Vancouver, demanding that the media stop glamorizing the Bacon brothers as noble folk heroes, and that the police start taking more of a proactive approach. In early 2008, Clayton Ruesch recruited two members of Calgary's fresh-off-the-boat killers gang, namely Billy Lai and Troy Tran, to come to the Lower Mainland to kill the Bacon brothers. On May 9, 2008, a young man named Jonathan Barber, who happened to vaguely resemble Jonathan Bacon because his hairstyle was the same as the Bacon brother hairstyle, was driving Jonathan Bacon's black Porsche Cayenne SUV down the Kingsway Highway from Abbotsford to Vancouver. Barber worked as the stereo equipment installer into automobiles, and he had been hired by Bacon to install a new audio system into his Cayenne. A car carrying a group of UN members, led by the professional wrestler Ion Croiteru and Barzan Tilly Choli, also going down the Kingsway, happened to see the Cayenne driven by Barber, and noticing from the distance that the driver looked like Jonathan Bacon, opened fire on the Cayenne, killing Jonathan Barber instantly. Tilly Choli became the leader of the United Nations gang after Clayton Ruesch was arrested in Texas on May 19, 2008. Tilly Choli, who became the most tenacious opponent of the Bacon brothers, was known for the human safaris, as he would spend hours cruising the Lower Mainland in his automobile looking for the Bacon brothers and other members of the Red Scorpions gang. On May 31, 2008, the police issued a statement warning anyone who was associating with Jonathan Bacon was putting their lives at risk. The charges against Jonathan Bacon, Godwin Cheng, and Raylene Burton for the possession of illegal weapons and drugs was dismissed when the judge ruled that the police lacked a warrant to search Cheng's car in 2005, and the arrest of Burton was also illegal because she only fled because of the arrests of Bacon and Cheng. On October 23, 2008, Dennis Karbovanek was stopped by the police, who found he was wearing a bulletproof vest and had a loaded handgun with a silencer in a hidden compartment in his Yukon Denali. The police also noted that Jonathan Bacon was driving right behind Karbovanek in his Mercedes-Benz when they pulled Karbovanek over. The police believed that Karbovanek was just a pawn negotiated with the Bacon brothers and worked out a deal where the Crown would drop all but one of the 11 weapons charges Karbovanek was facing in exchange for the brothers handing over Karbovanek's weapons cache. Jonathan Bacon handed over to Abbotsford Police Detective Lyle Simpson on behalf of Karbovanek 7 handguns, 2 shotguns, a hand grenade, an Uzi submachine gun, a rifle, and 114 sticks of dynamite. In return, the Crown dropped 10 of the 11 charges and released him on $15,000 bail. When the deal the Crown made with the Bacon brothers became public knowledge, it led a firestorm of criticism in the media and on social media, as the Crown was accused of being far too lenient with the gang. Adding to the criticism were photographs that the Bacon brothers posted on social media showing themselves enjoying lavish vacations in Mexico. One of the leaders of the UN gang, Connor DeMonte, discussed plans in late 2008 to have a helicopter drop a bomb on the Bacon brothers' home. The plan that was abandoned, according to one of those involved, who later turned Crown's evidence as too difficult logistically. You never know how big the bomb could be. You could damage or kill the neighbors. Another means considered by DeMonte was buying a military rocket launcher to use it to pierce one of the brothers' armored vehicle, a plan that was also abandoned when it proved impossible to buy a contraband rocket launcher. In January of 2009, Tilly Choli was with Billy Lai of the fresh-off-the-boat killers gang of Calgary, waiting outside of the GM place where a Lil Wayne concert was being held, hoping to kill the Bacon brothers who were attending the concert. Lai was overheard on videotape telling Tilly Choli to unload the whole thing, i.e. fire the entire round of his AK-47, if he saw the Bacon brothers. The police arrested both Tilly Choli and Lai before the attempt could be made. On January 16, 2009, the Abbotsford police answered a call that 3 men was seen carrying guns at the Seven Oaks shopping center. The 3 men turned out to be the Bacon brothers. No guns were found on them. Jonathan was wearing a bulletproof vest. On January 20th, 2009, at about 3:50 p.m., Jamie Bacon was driving in his Mercedes-Benz on the South Fraser Way and had stopped at a red light when a SUV pulled alongside him and a group of men opened fire. 6 bullets were pumped in Jamie's Mercedes-Benz, which led him to run the red light, and he drove manically down the South Fraser Way at high speed, being chased by his would-be assassins. Bacon ended up crashing his automobile into a keg restaurant after his car hit a median. After learning that Jonathan Bacon had moved into a condo at 651 Nootka Way in Port Moody on February 3, 2009, the Port Moody police warned in a public statement that to associate with any of the 3 Bacon brothers was to put one's life in danger. Langton wrote, "Not surprisingly, the Port Moody warning didn't work. If anything, it only made the gangsta wannabe kids in the Lower Mainland admire the Bacon brothers even more. The boys had proved they were not just untouchable by law enforcement, but also by their enemies. Their lives were like the twisted fantasies of a bored 12-year-old. The warning only put an official stamp on it." Later on the same day of the Port Moody warning, an associate of the brothers, Raphael Baldini, was gunned down in Surrey. People in the Lower Mainland flooded social media sites with praise and tributes for Baldini. On February 6, 2009, a Bacon brother associate, Kevin LeClaire, was shot in the front of the Marketplace IGA grocery and died the next day. On February 16, 2009, Nicole Marie Alamy, the wife of a UN gang member, Koshan Alamy, was gunned down in her car. As she was driving only with her 4-year-old son and the windows of her Cadillac CTS coupe were clear, it is believed that this was not a case of mistaken identity, but rather that her killers had targeted her intentionally as a way to bring grief to her husband. The murder of Alamy finally changed public opinion in the Lower Mainland, and people began to supply information about the underworld. For the first time, the police phone lines for tips was overwhelmed as thousands of people called in to supply potential information about the Alamy murder. Mountie Corporal Dale Carr told the media, "We're starting to see a bit of a groundswell, of people just saying, 'Enough is enough, we're fed up, we're going to give a call.'" 2 of the callers identified themselves as longtime members of the Red Scorpions, who both stated that they were disgusted by the cold-blooded execution of a mother in front of her 4-year-old son, and the information they supplied proved to be very useful to the police. On February 22, 2009, an anti-gang rally was held in Surrey's Central City Plaza, where the lead speaker was Eileen Mohan, who demanded once again that the police take action to arrest those responsible for the Surrey 6 massacre. On January 19, 2009, the Police Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit was contacted by a man known as GL due to a court order who wanted to work as an informer, provided the Crown was willing to pay him for his services and information. The Crown was desperate for any information that might convict the Bacon brothers and agreed to GL's offer. GL had served a prison sentence in California for smuggling cocaine from Mexico, and upon his return to Canada contacted Wayne Scott, whose daughter Carly was the girlfriend of Jared Bacon and the mother of his child. GL's connections with organized crime circles in the United States and Mexico, together with him serving a prison sentence in California, made his offer to import $3 million worth of cocaine seemed credible to Wayne Scott. Through Wayne Scott, the informer GL first met Jared Bacon in February of 2009, where he spoke about importing 100 kilograms of cocaine from Mexico, which he would then sell to Bacon. Jared Bacon stated he had a financial backer in the form of very wealthy Indo-Canadian berry farmer who who was willing to lend him $3 million in cash to pay for the cocaine. Wayne Scott and GL seemed to have a low opinion of Jared's backer, whom they always called a fucking Hindu. GL went to work for a diamond mine in northern British Columbia for the next 2 months, but stayed in contact with Bacon via his cell phone. On April 1st, 2009, Dennis Karbovanek of the Red Scorpions confessed to the police his role in the Surrey 6 massacre. On April 3, 2009, Karbovanek was arrested on charges of first-degree murder for his role in the Surrey 6 massacre on the basis of his confession. Karbovanek confessed to killing Ryan Bartolomeo, Michael Lai, and Christopher Mohan. Karbovanek, in an interview with journalist Kim Bolan of the Vancouver Sun, stated that hearing Eileen Mohan speak on television had persuaded him to come forward and confess. One of the neighbors of the Bacon family told Langton in an interview that the arrest of Jamie Bacon on April 3, 2009, at his parents' Strathcona courthouse, it was like a movie, a war movie. The cops looked like soldiers, all dressed in black with body armor and heavy weapons. Jamie did not resist arrest and was led into a police cruiser wearing his Red Scorpions hoodie and track pants. Rob Gordon, a criminologist at Simon Fraser University, was not impressed with the arrest, saying, "There is a colossal drug industry operating behind these kinds of individuals who, to my mind, are actually fairly low down on the pecking order." However, Langton argued that the arrest of Jamie was a turning point in the gang war as many Lower Mainland youth idolized the gangsters, especially the Bacon brothers. Until the Surrey 6 arrest, they appeared untouchable. Until that point, they were like the mythical gangsters of movies and popular music. They lived above the law, drove fancy cars, and had the prettiest girls. They made millions selling drugs, and they got away with murder. Langton wrote that the arrest of Jamie Bacon put a dent into their image. On April 4, 2009, Matthew Johnson, Cody Ray Havisher, and Jamie Bacon of the Red Scorpions were all charged with first-degree murder on the basis of Karbovanek's statement. In June 2009, it emerged that the delivery people of Canada Post had been refusing to deliver the mail on Strathcona Court since April 2009, out of the fear of their lives, saying it was too dangerous, much to vexation of the other people living on Strathcona Court, who complained that their mail was not being delivered. The delivery woman for Strathcona Court stated she saw Jamie Bacon being arrested on April 3, 2009, and was very traumatized by what she saw. Ken Mooney, the president of the Abbotsford Local of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, told the media, "This is the first time I have ever encountered this. Our employees are afraid to deliver there." Between June and December of 2009, Brassington had a torrid affair with the former girlfriend of Jamie Bacon, a woman known as Jane Doe 1, due to a court order, who agreed to testify for the Crown against Jamie Bacon. It was revealed after his guilty plea in 2019 that Brassington had billed the Crown for overtime pay while he was in fact drinking and having sex with Jane Doe 1 in various luxury hotels in Calgary, Montreal, Toronto, Victoria, Halifax, and Vancouver between June-December 2009. The police misconduct later almost ruined the case against Jamie Bacon, as his lawyers argued that much of testimony against him was perjury, as the detectives were sleeping with the witnesses against him. The statements from two of the detectives who sought to explain their heavy drinking on the job as due to being allegedly incapable of rational thought left the evidence gathered by the first investigation wide open to attack from Jamie Bacon's lawyers. As a result, the police were forced to essentially restart the entire investigation anew, costing the Crown thousands of dollars and wasting countless hours of police time. Upon GL's return to the Lower Mainland, he was contacted by Wayne Scott on May 2, 2009, about the cocaine deal, saying that Jared wanted a sample of the cocaine before committing the money. GL then signed a contract with the police to become an agent source informant, giving him immunity in exchange for a promise to testify at any trial. Jared was arrested in May 2009 on weapons charges, but released on bail. While wearing a wire, GL recorded Jared speaking frankly about his desire to import cocaine from Mexico, while GL tried to have Jared visit the warehouse that he rented in Vancouver. Jared was clearly unwilling to visit the warehouse despite GL's best efforts, out of fear of violating his bail conditions might send him to jail. Jared's backer seems to have abandoned the deal, as Jared was recorded demanding starting in the summer that GL provide him with the cocaine on credit, with a promise to pay him back later. At a meeting at the Scott household on August 2, 2009, Jared used an erasable marker board to write messages with GL, but he sometimes spoke instead. At another meeting at Scott's house on August 13, 2009, Jared spoke about the financing of the drug deal with GL, who, unknown to him, recorded it on the wire he was wearing. At one point, Jared complained about having to pay up front before the cocaine arrived, leading GL to speak about the financial details. Jared interrupted and told him, "We're not interested in how you do this, because the more you tell me, the more I get worried that this is a setup." In another conversation with GL, Wayne Scott complained that his daughter Carly wanted all of the commission to go to herself instead of him. On August 26, 2009, GL phoned Scott to tell him that he had 72 kilograms of cocaine in his warehouse and complained that Jared was being cheap in demanding that GL give him $300,000 worth of cocaine with a promise to pay later. In response, Scott told GL that Jared would have the money. Jared was driven by his parents to Scott's house, but the drug deal did not go through. GL was angry when he learned that Jared would pick up the cocaine at 10 p.m., leading him to say to Scott on his cell phone, "You know what 10 o'clock means to me? Pitch black and guns." Scott had to promise GL that Jared was not planning to rob him, despite his fears. Wayne Scott drove on past the warehouse when he saw cars that he felt might be police cars parked outside, while Jared turned out not to have the money as he had promised. Jared later claimed he had no intention of paying for the cocaine, but rather he was planning to steal it. The deal seemed to have collapsed after August 27, 2007, as GL had his last phone conversation with Wayne Scott that day, as it appeared that Jared believed that GL might be an informer, while it was apparent that Jared did not have the money that he promised to pay GL. On September 11, 2009, Jamie Bacon sued the Crown and Warden Debbie Hobbold of the Surrey Pretrial Services Center, claiming that being held in solitary confinement was a form of torture. In the same lawsuit, Bacon also charged that cell 210 of the Surrey jail that he had lived in was full of blood, feces, and mucus, and his bed was a vinyl-covered foam mat. Bacon charged that cell 227 was a considerable improvement as it had a shower, a television, and a microwave, but he complained that mentally ill prisoners had damaged the latter too. In 2010, a court ruled in favor of Bacon and ordered the Crown to pay him damages. On November 26, 2009, Jared Bacon and Wayne Scott were arrested and charged with conspiracy to import cocaine based on what GL had recorded. Carly Scott was not charged. In a rare move, the Crown appealed the dismissal of the charges against Jonathan Bacon for the 2005 arrest, which Justice Donald Gardner had ruled was illegal because of the lack of a search warrant. The British Columbia Court of Appeal, in an even rarer move, upheld the Crown's appeal and restated the charges against Bacon, Cheng, and Burton. Jonathan Bacon, together with Larry Amaro of the Hells Angels, and James Riech and Randy Naker of the Independent Soldiers, formed a group called the Wolfpack Alliance in 2010. The police had their first inkling of the existence of the group when Jonathan was frequently seen cruising Burrard Inlet with Amaro on the latter's speedboat named Steroids and Silicone. Langton wrote that the Castle Fun Park meeting of 2006 was a recruiting meeting with the independent soldiers acting, as they always did, as the Hells Angels proxy, luring the Bacon brothers away from the increasingly independent and unreliable UN to the more docile and malleable Red Scorpions. The senior partner in the Wolfpack was Amaro. The Hells Angels allowed their members to have side operations, provided that the rest of the chapter is informed and allowed a cut of the profit. Other members of the Wolfpack Alliance were the Alcalil family of Montreal and Ottawa, Johnny Raposo and Martino Caputo of Toronto, Shane Maloney of the Montreal's West End Gang, and Nick Nero, a drug smuggler from Niagara Falls. The journalists Peter Edwards and Luis Najera wrote that the Wolfpack Alliance were a loosely allied and multi-ethnic group of mostly millennial-age gangsters who operated across the country. A gangster who turned against gangster lifestyle was Gurmit Singh Dak, the co-boss of the Dak Duri gang. The Dak Duri group was allied with the United Nations gang. After being shot and wounded in a restaurant, Dak contacted the Odd Squad, youth engagement unit of the RCMP, about making an anti-gang video for high school students. In a video made in June 2010, Dak stated, "The swaggering macho aggression of the gangsters hid a deep insecurity," as he stated that to live the life of a gangster was to live in fear, never knowing when someone would try to kill him, and never knowing who to trust. Dak stated, "If I could turn back time, I would never do it again. Every day, I've got to look over my shoulder. I've got to worry about my family. I've got to worry about, like, if I jump out of my car, am I going to get shot? Or, I could be walking in the mall and walking out and get shot. I don't know. Oh, I want to get out, but it's too late now to get out. I have too many enemies." On October 16, 2010, Dak's prescience about his imminent demise was proved correct when he was murdered, with his corpse being found in his BMW in the parking lot of the Metrotown Mall in Burnaby. The cause of Dak's death was being shot in the face. Suvir Suk Dak, the younger brother of Gurmit, believed that the Wolfpack gang and that Amaro, Riach, and Jonathan Bacon in particular were the ones responsible for his brother's murder. Dak vowed to avenge his brother's murder. The police believe that the Wolfpack group was indeed responsible for the murder of Gurmit Dak, but have stated there was insufficient evidence to lay charges, given that the killer of Dak has never been identified. The younger Dak had hired a team of 4 hitmen to hunt down the Wolfpack and stayed in touch with them via encrypted text messages on his cell phone. The hit team placed GPS tracking devices on the bottom of vehicles belonging to the Wolfpack as a way to track them down. On August 13, 2011, Dak received word via an encrypted text that GPS tracking showed that all the leaders of the Wolfpack were staying at the Delta Grand Hotel in Kelowna. In response, Dak sent out a hit team consisting of Jason McBride and Michael Jones from Vancouver to be joined by Jujar Kun Kun and Manjinder Mani Heron, who traveled separately. Dak wanted to see the Wolfpack wiped out, sending texts to the 4 hitmen saying this was a chance to finally avenge his brother. McBride, who once had been given a gift of golden balls with Chinese characters worth $6,000 on them by Gurmit, was especially keen on avenging his friend. McBride had attended Gurmit's funeral in October 2010 and had been pressing Suk Dak for revenge ever since the funeral. On August 14, 2011, Jonathan was murdered outside the Delta Grand Hotel in Kelowna, BC. At about 2:45 p.m. on August 14, 2011, a white Porsche Cayenne carrying 6 people was leaving the parking lot of the Delta Grand Hotel when a group of 4 masked gunmen carrying AK-47 assault rifles opened fire. The gunmen fired at least 30 shots into the Cayenne, killing Jonathan Bacon, wounding Amaro, and leaving a 21-year waitress, Leah Haddon-Watts, a quadriplegic as she took a bullet straight through her neck, severing her spinal cord. Lindsay Black, another woman in the Cayenne, took bullets through both her thighs. Jonathan Bacon took bullets to his left lung, stomach, spleen, left kidney, bowel, and bladder, causing him to be spasmodic as he fell out of the Cayenne, bleeding badly while having lost complete control of his bowels and bladder. Bacon died a few minutes later of massive blood loss despite the attempts to save his life via CPR. Larry Amaro, a full-patch member of the Hells Angels, was also critically injured in the attack. Ryark was also in the Cayenne and fled from the scene, bleeding and in panic. Ryarch ended up going to the Philippines, under the grounds that Canada was too dangerous for him. The attack proved to be a major setback for Wolfpack, with one of its members killed, another in a hospital, and a third widely seen as a coward, as the parking lot security cameras showed Ryark fleeing from the Cayenne. After the attack, McBride sent an encrypted text to one of his associates, Amir Moonbat Ektasad. "Bro, there's going to be crazy heat and I'm going to chill at home till I get to Toronto on Friday." On January 17, 2012, Sandip Dippy Duri, the co-boss of the Dak Dura group, was shot dead while leaving a Vancouver hotel in a revenge attack for the Delta Grand Hotel incident. Niker was shot dead outside of a Starbucks cafe in Port Moody on June 25, 2012. On November 19, 2012, Suvir Sukh Dak and his bodyguard Thomas Mantle were murdered. Manjinder Heron, one of the gunmen who killed Bacon, was killed on January 14, 2013, in Surrey. Dean Michael Wuchar was charged with killing Dura with the Crown, alleging he was a hitman for the Wolfpack. In 2018, Riach was convicted of drug trafficking in the Philippines and sentenced to life imprisonment. Jason McBride, Jujhar Kun Kun, and Michael Carey Hunter Jones were charged with the shooting. On May 1, 2018, McBride, in a plea bargain with the Crown, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for the Delta Grand Hotel attack, while Kun Kun and Jones also made plea bargains, pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit murders. In their agreed statement of facts as part of their plea bargains, Kun Kun, Jones, and McBride stated that Suvir Dak hired them to kill the Wolfpack as revenge for the murder of Gurmit Dak. Superintendent Pat Fogarty of the Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit stated that the oldest Bacon's death and the incarceration of the other two brothers will create such turmoil among the leadership of the gang that the popularity and influence of the Red Scorpions will decrease within the British Columbia gang world.
If you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to click on the notification bell so you'll be up to date on all videos released from the Everything Network.